Hello everybody, here again for another reading of the Kraken's Curse. A little late tonight as it's been a bit of a hectic day, one thing and another. And I'm going to read just one chapter tonight, but I will be back tomorrow for two more chapters. I'm going to take these off because I can see that they are reflecting in the screen there. Dodgy camera again, not sure exactly why that is, but I'll try and use my office computer tomorrow for the reading tomorrow night. But now we're going to read chapter 17 of the Kraken's Curse. Chapter 17, Making Sense of the Situation. The room was silent. Not a floorboard creaked and not a window latch clicked. Far in the distance a barn owl hooted into the night, and if you pricked up your ears you could hear a pin drop. It was as if a large half of the puzzle had been presented to them on a silver platter. What Horace had told them was by far the most important piece of information that they could ever possess. It was beyond belief. There were so many things wrapped up within what they had just heard, so many clues and so many directions to follow. It was strange. Arthur's mouth was wide open, and sitting on the chair, he looked almost comical from a distance. Megan was leaning against him with her head in her hands. She found the whole thing extremely sad, and it reminded her of when she had found out about her father's death. There was only one person who looked strangely interested. Captain McCrae held his pipe in the corner of his mouth and stroked his beard thoughtfully. This was just as important for him as it was for Arthur. It helped him to understand his foe, and not only did it give him a name and a personality, but it told him of the dangers he would face. Far from being scared of what he had just heard, as he might have been beforehand, Captain McCrae was pleased. "I presume you see the importance of this information?" Horace spoke suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Of course I do," Arthur whispered, still a little shocked. "I have finally discovered what actually happened to my father on the night that he disappeared." "Correct, and it also gives us some key information about the Kraken and his powers. We know he had a name, Otane. We also know that he tried to use a magical scroll to defeat George and gain what he called his rightful place on this earth." "Yes, but wouldn't it be helpful if we were in possession of the scroll?" Megan piped up, surprised at her own courage. "Because if we don't have it, it means that the Kraken may still be in possession of it, and that would make it very hard to defeat him." Horace smiled. It was one of his cheeky smiles that showed he had planned ahead, and one that harked back to the strangely comic demeanour that Arthur remembered. "Ah, I agree," he chuckled. "And that is why I am so sure of our success. I stand before you with Otane's scroll in my hand." "The scroll you've just read to us from?" Arthur smiled. "The very same," Horace replied. "But how could that be?" Megan fumbled with her words. "Well, this is where we see the good magic always triumphs over evil magic," Horace answered. "You know that on the night of the battle, George carried with him a silver sword. A sword that almost completely secured his victory over Otane." Captain McCrae, who had been strangely silent until this point, suddenly understood. "The sword of Alexander Boston," he tittered, finding it unnaturally amusing. "Now you're getting somewhere," Horace shouted, jumping up from his seat. "A great man! A very smart man! Where did you ever learn such things, Jonathan?" "It was in the book that I was reading prior to the sinking of my ship. It said that the only way to kill the Kraken is with the legendary sword of Alexander Boston, though normal people believe the sword to be long lost in history." "I see you know this creature well. Now, Arthur, can you tell me where the sword of Alexander Boston is now? Can you prove to me that it is not in fact lost in thousands of years of history?" I don't know," Arthur stuttered, trying to recall the sword. Everything was washing over his head. It was all too much. "Oh, come on," Horace teased him. "You are a smart boy, Arthur. You have your father's knowledge. You must be able to remember what you saw when you first visited me all that time ago." Arthur's mind suddenly clicked. He knew what Horace wanted him to say, and he knew where he had seen the sword before. It's the sword above your front door." Arthur smiled as if everything dropped into place. "The one that I was fascinated with on my first visit. You have it in a glass display case." Clever boy! Clever boy! Horace boomed, patting Arthur on the back. Megan turned and positively beamed in Arthur's direction. Now that we know I have possession of Ottane's scroll and the sword of Alexander Boston, I believe we have what it takes to face the Kraken once and for all. But there is one other thing that I can't seem to understand, Arthur said. That's how did you manage to gain possession of these artifacts in the first place? I see you never miss a thing, Arthur, Horace replied, his tone of voice the same. I should of course explain this to you, but as you will soon see, this in itself leads us to another problem. Your father, as you may have gathered, is the current holder of a divine bloodline, a mystical people which date back over many thousands of years. Now, I will not pretend that I know anything about all of this divine line, but in this particular case I have done many hours of research, and I believe that I have now come to a conclusion as to why I have such powerful objects in my possession. When your father attacked the Kraken with the sword, some of its powers were locked up within your father. You may ask why this blow did not kill the Kraken, and there is a simple answer to this. The sword wounded the leg and not the chest. Because the chest was not wounded, the blow only caused the transformation of the magic in that part of the body over to your father. Luckily, this greatly weakened the Kraken, and he did not have the strength to submit a final blow. But your father, George, was a far greater magician than the Kraken could ever be, and when the sword made impact, he had already realised what would happen. In times of great danger, I believe that the divine race can summon up spears of magic far greater than anything than they themselves control. Much like you or I, summoning up the strength for one last lunge, even when we know we have already lost. Of course, this surge of power was a lot greater than George first thought, and it attracted the sword, the parchment, the Kraken, and George himself into one loop of light. The only way that George could save himself from this was to use some very powerful tongs. It is lucky for us that on the night the spell George cast not only submitted the Kraken to life imprisonment in the sea and secured the two artifacts' safety, but also rewrote the lines on the parchment to show a detailed account of the events that took place. Unfortunately, this act of bravery meant that George had to sacrifice himself, but he left the clues and the weapons required, and I believe he wants us to carry on where he left off. Arthur was stunned for the second time that evening. It seemed strange, but it all fitted together. He always knew deep down that his father would not leave him without a trace. He knew that he would have left clues. He just didn't realise that they would be so obvious and well planned out. Why hadn't he noticed it before? And it was in that split second that Arthur made a decision. He knew now that it made sense that they were ready to go ahead with their battle plans. Sounds like a plan, Arthur smiled, looking around the room at everyone. Who's with me? All three pairs of eyes were glazed across, and each person was deep in thought. I feel we need as many people as possible if we stand any chance at all, Horace boomed, and for that I am with you. You always knew I would go, Megan smiled. It might be a little scary and dangerous, but after all, you do need someone to look after you. She slipped her arms tightly around his chest and they both smiled. Well, that just leaves you, Arthur beckoned in Captain McRae's direction. Are you with us? Indeed I am, the captain replied. I owe you that much at least. But there's something else you might need to know. Something I just remembered. Well, you should tell us straight away, Horace answered. Go ahead. On the day my ship sank, and I was spoken to by the Kraken, he told me something. He spoke as if he was the most important creature in the sea, and he told me of his plans and how he was going to implement them. He said that his powers were draining ever since he had been imprisoned by George, and he told me that he had tried to once escape and failed miserably. The Kraken said that he met George on a hill. George was in the form of a silver fox, and the Kraken was in the lowest ghost-like form that he could muster. Of course, it was easy for George to escape from this, for the Kraken was very weak, and even the smallest of magical powers could sway the situation. I believe this was the reason why the Kraken attacked my ship in the first place. He was growing weaker by the day, and he had to use the last of his powers. He wanted me to do his bidding on the land and try and kill the silver fox. This is very interesting, Horace replied, looking the captain up and down. Again, this helps us, as it shows the Kraken is weak, and so he would be easier to kill. Wait, there is more, Captain McRae butted in. Go on, Horace replied. Well, the Kraken also told me of his world domination. I believe this is how he put me under his control, and it will always be imprinted in my mind. I think you may want to write this down. Beware of adventures on a sea of gold, where tarnished memories and darkness behold. A silent night so deadly and clear, where to answer all questions the divine one appears. Mysterious happenings and plans will conspire, when on the evening so dark simple truth we require. This day dawns for evermore, and trapped we will be. The land will be ruled and imprisoned by the sea. It was as the captain spoke, and told with valour the words that had been imprinted on his mind by the Kraken, that Horace wrote down the lines precisely. And when he had finished, he underlined the final word with a thick red pen, and wrote in his strangely hypnotic handwriting, "The Kraken's Curse." So that is chapter 17 of The Kraken's Curse, my novel, and we are now moving towards part 3 of the book, and I will be back to read chapter 18 and chapter 19 tomorrow night. So I do hope you can join me for those. I will continue reading till we get to the end of this particular novel once again.